Let's get ourselves back in the story. So it's an interesting book. All the books of the Bible are interesting books, but Esther especially. Where is the setting? Does anyone know what location this whole story takes place in? Which is in which kingdom? Persia. So remember from the book of Daniel, we had the Babylonians. Then we had different stories, and remember Darius. Darius was a Persian king. So this is kind of in the same vein. Ahasuerus now, but this is in Persia. But again, we're talking about the Jewish people specifically. And as we go through the story, one of the things to notice is that it's very, I guess, Israel-centric. It's focused only on the Jewish people, and really it's a story about them. And why do you think that is? Why are we talking about the Jewish people in a foreign country? Besides that, it's the Bible. Is there a reason why God would make that the theme? Any thoughts?
So that we didn't forget about it.
I think that's exactly right. I think one of the big, this is kind of what my Bible teacher actually had posited to me, but one of the reasons this book is here is the question, will God protect and guide his people even if they are in a foreign country and they don't care about him? We've seen the book of Daniel. Okay, Daniel was taken as a captive, like he was forced to go to Babylon at that time, and then he was still faithful to God. Like, okay, yeah, God takes care of that person. We read Ezra and Nehemiah. Yeah, God's faithful to those people. They went back there trying to rebuild the walls and the temple. But now we're at this book about Esther. And Mordecai and Esther, they've actually stayed in the land of Persia. A lot of people have gone back, not everyone. If you remember, when in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, Ezra, they built the temple and it's kind of not so great. They rebuilt it, but it's not as nice. They rebuilt the walls, but they rebuilt it out of the rubble. Not a lot of people necessarily wanted to move back to Israel. They're in the rebuilding stages, literally. So the nation was, would be kind of like traveling to a developing country. A lot of people didn't want to go. They're in this nice country, Persia. They have the fanciest stuff. They have all the food. They have all the architecture. Why do you want to move back to Israel? So many people have stayed. But that kind of leads us to the question, well, these people are kind of living here, not going back to the land that God has promised them. So is God going to take care of his people? And some other things to note in this book is the whole narrative is kind of secular in a way, in a couple different ways. One, it doesn't mention God, and I think there's a reason for that, for reasons. But also, everyone's known by their Persian names. The book of Daniel, Daniel's actually his Hebrew name. Remember his Babylonian name was Belteshazzar. But Esther is actually a Persian name. Mordecai is a Persian name. Why are they going by Persian names? We've seen some behavior by Esther and Mordecai that isn't condoned by the Old Testament, to say the least. One, they're staying in Persia, but also Esther sleeping with the king, going through this whole, again, she was probably forced to, but still. And also they both ate the food. It seems like they're very comfortable in this country, very comfortable not really keeping the traditions that God has handed down. So just kind of to put that all there, there's a big contrast between Esther and Daniel. There's also a big contrast between Esther and like Ezra and Nehemiah, and a big contrast definitely with all the books of people that are in Israel. So again, as we go through the story, one of the points is, will God protect his people even if they're in this foreign land? They don't really seem to be following what he's commanded them to do. So with that in mind, something else to notice, I know Pastor Sam brought this out, is the theme of providence. And I was thinking about this morning, and how many of you guys, anyone else like detective novels? Anyone else like detective stories? I like I'm a big detective story. But this is kind of like, in some ways, this is a poorly written detective novel, because there's some novels where like you get to the very end and you're like, oh, I'm surprised that was the bad guy. But in this story, it's kind of like giving you clues. All right, is God working here? Is God not? And in some ways, I think one of the reasons the author doesn't share the name of God is because the author wants you to come to the conclusion yourself, okay, either the story is fake or God had to be working. Like there's no middle ground. So that was just what I was thinking this morning. But I mean, as we go through the story, we're going to see how kind of it's almost ridiculous. It is ridiculous what happens. It's not, in my opinion, this could never happen by coincidence. So keep kind of those two themes in mind. Will God protect and care for his people in this foreign land when they're not following him? And the author intentionally leaving out God, who's doing the action in the story. All right, so chapter 5 kind of left us at this tension point. Esther has prepared this first banquet. She's invited the king and Haman back for another banquet. Haman's about to kill Mordecai. He's built these gallows or stakes to hang him out. So let's get into, we kind of have these two parties, if you will, Haman and his family versus Mordecai, Esther, and the Jewish people, for worldly power versus God's people. So chapter 6, I kind of titled this the beginning of Haman's demise. And it's pretty quick. Would someone like to read the first 9 verses of Esther chapter 6?
On that night could not the king sleep, and he commanded to bring the book of records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's chamberlains, the keepers of the door, who sought to lay hand on the king's hazards. And the king said, "What honor and dignity hath been done to Mordecai for this?" Then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, "There is nothing done for him." And the king said, "Who is in the court?" Now Haman was come into the outward court of the king's house to speak unto the king, to hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. And the king's servant said unto him, "Behold, Haman standeth in the court." And the king said, "Let him come in." So Haman came in, and the king said unto him, "What shall be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor?" Now Haman thought in his heart, "In whom would the king delight to be honored more than to himself, than to myself?" And Haman answered the king, "For the man whom the king delighteth to honor, let the royal apparel be brought which the king useth to wear, and the horse that the king rideth on, and the crown royal which is set upon his head. And let this apparel and the horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that they may array the man withal whom the king delighteth to honor, and bring him on horseback through the street of the sleep, and proclaim before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delighteth to honor."
Okay, so we're building the story here. Probably a lot of people know the story, but is there anything that stands out to you, like, oh, that's kind of weird, this happened randomly already? Anything that stands out as kind of, oh, that's an ironic twist?
So he woke up one night and was like, "Bring the records."
Yeah.
That was like,
Can't sleep.
wow.
I mean, it's kind of one of those things, maybe you read the dictionary or something, like to go to sleep because it's boring. So I don't know if that's his reason. What else? What they read about? Out of all the records they could read about, they read about Mordecai.
It's called God's timing.
Yeah. And I also now Haman had just entered, and he's going to talk about these stakes, these gallows that he built for whom? For Mordecai, whom the king just read about. This is incredible. And here Haman says, "All right, let one of the king's most noble officials lead Mordecai through the city." And verse 10, then the king said to Haman, "Hurry, take the robes and the horses you have said, and do so to Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Leave out nothing that you have mentioned." Haman's trying to kill Mordecai. But the king just told Haman, "Go and honor Mordecai." And I don't know exactly how it looked, but you have Haman kind of leading this horse around, shouting out to the people, "Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." That would really put a damper on your day, I think.
I just think the whole ironic part, though, is that the entire time Haman was like, "Oh, this is for me." He thought the whole time that, the king was asking him this so he could do it to him. So he was like, what do I want? Okay.
I mean, which is actually the right way to go about like, what do I want? But yeah, you can see how his pride just completely blinded him.
It almost seems like he was given like a chance here to repent from his decision to execute Mordecai. Because if he had just burst into the king's palace and be like, execute Mordecai, the king would be like so confused. He's like, I'm gonna honor this man, and you want to kill him? And then I feel like that would just not go down really well. So he was like almost spared in a sense.
Yeah, that's
because he was given this situation.
gets a little more time, not much, but a little more time. After this, if you remember, Haman's counselors he has his wife Zeresh, and he has these other advisors who kind of counsel him. So after he has to do this for Haman, he's pretty sorry shape. He's like, what in the world is that? He's mourning with his head covered, it says. And I told him all that happened, and this is kind of these words. Imagine, you're going to your friends, your family. Remember, they're all superstitious. They're all very much, they cast lots to find when they should take out the Jewish people. Very superstitious, and they kind of have this outlook of, the fates, destiny, this will happen, what will happen if this happens. Here's what they say to him. If Mordecai, before whom you've begun to fall, is of the Jewish people, you will not overcome him, but surely fall before him. You will not overcome him, but surely fall before him. Again, it's a little bit unclear. Okay, you're going to fall before him. What does that mean? But before he even gets time to think about that, while they're yet talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried to bring Haman to the feast that Esther had prepared. So the last thing he has in his mind from his family is these words. And as they're doing that, it's kind of the servants come in and they take him out so he can go to the feast really quickly. He doesn't even have time to really comprehend what's going on to him. Something else just to notice, though, is notice how in like all these passages, whenever Mordecai is mentioned, it's like Mordecai the Jew, the Jewish people. It's very clear the author is trying to point out this is because they're specific people. So now we get to the second feast, and this is chapter 7. So could someone read the first 6 verses of chapter 7?
Oh, chapter 7?
Yes.
Okay. So the king and Haman went into the feast with Queen Esther. And on the second day, as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king said to Esther, "What is your wish, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom, it shall be fulfilled." Then Queen Esther answered, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be granted me for my wish, and my people for my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. If we had been merely sold as slaves, men and women, I would have been silent, for our affliction is not to be compared with the loss to the king." Then the king Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther, "Who is he, and where is he who has dared to do this?" And Esther said, "A foe, an enemy, this wicked Haman." Then Haman was terrified before the king.
All right. This king, he has a quick temper. We've seen that from chapter 1. He sometimes is not the best, honestly, at making decisions. The queen just called Haman wicked, and Haman is terrified. I can't imagine how scared he must be, because there's being scared of something. You're in the, maybe in the woods in the middle of the night, and you hear some sounds. You got a bears and stuff. But
Is it Daniel Kirkman Woods?
But this, again, keep in mind, very superstitious, very, is wicked, and just kind of get into his mind. He thinks he's got it all in control, and suddenly everything, in one day, everything has gone completely wrong. And then Haman tries to plead for mercy from the queen. The king interprets it as assault, whether purposely or accidentally he interprets that, we don't know. And then Harbona, who's one of the counselors from chapter 1, he's not very helpful to Haman's cause. Maybe he dislikes Haman as well. But he says, "Hey, Haman just built these gallows out there." And he adds that Haman has prepared for Mordecai, whose word saved the king, by the way. So no one's helping Harbona. And with that, Haman's hanged up for everyone to see. He's executed, and again, these probably their stakes, and probably his body was just put up there, which is really gruesome. But that's what he had planned to do to Mordecai. They just left his body out there. Again, this pole is like, assuming the cubit's 18 inches, it's like 75 feet tall. So imagine, coming to church today and looking on the steeple. And, I mean, that's kind of what it was. That's what happened. All right, let's pause. What is the author trying to show us about this story through Haman specifically? What are the ironic twists? What's the author trying to show us?
Pride cometh before a real big fall.
Yeah, pride comes before a fall. More than pride, I would say, even like attacking God's people. It's disposition. Anything else?
Just trusting God no matter what. I feel like Esther and Mordecai, they didn't really know what the end of this story would be. Like, it's funny reading it to us, but like being in that situation, like they were supposed to die and they didn't know the end of the story, and how ironic, and God would just like put it together. But I don't, just practically for us, it's like just trust that God can do miraculous things through wicked people who we don't really understand how that will happen.
Yeah, as you read it, this is real people's lives on the line. Like, this isn't like, we have problems too. And I don't know if this is going to work out. For me, maybe it's like, I don't know if I'm going to get a good grade on this homework. I mean, that's, compared to this is nothing. They're literally about to die. They're about, from the month when Haman had done this, they're about 11 months until this day of execution comes. And Mordecai was going to be killed the day that Haman was coming to talk to the king. Like, it's like, all right, I've prepared these gallows. I'm going to hang up Mordecai that day. So it is last second, but kind of trusting in God to the end. Anything else? I have one more thing that I kind of thought about.
I think it's kind of interesting that the king hasn't figured out his wife is Jewish.
He's kind of got a lot to deal with.
Yeah.
It's like the queen.
I don't know. I zoned for a second, so I don't know if this was said because I was thinking about whatever. Anyway, but like it's kind of cool how God uses people. Like it was very clear that Esther wasn't really following the Lord, but like how He uses her, even though she's not following God, and how she used her in a huge way to show His power. So that's really cool.
Yeah, and I will say, Esther, while she hasn't, followed the law obviously to T, she's still been obeying Mordecai, and she's been living carefully. She's been living in wisdom. It hasn't been like she's completely gone off the rail or something. I mean, she could have refused to go to the king even and said, I'm going to hide my identity. No one's going to know. So
And
there
she
is.
showed huge amounts of faith by doing just little things.
Yeah. So, I don't know what's going through her mind or anything, but there is a little bit of Esther to show faith, even though she was very uncertain. She thought she might die going for the king. Yeah, it's a good point. Something else that I thought of was God's vengeance, and how He's the one that repays people's evil, and it's not, God doesn't give us that responsibility generally. And usually when I think about God's vengeance, I usually think, oh, God is merciful, God is slow to wrath, God's not going to, we're not going to do anything in this life, God will do it later, which God is merciful, He is slow to anger. But I think the other side of it that I never really considered before is that God's vengeance is also intense and it's perfect. So when you see in the story of Haman, the way God takes Haman down, like no human could have come up with a plan like that to take Haman down. It's actually a perfect plan. So just remembering that even in vengeance or whatever God does, He does it in a perfect way. And I don't know, I just never had considered that before, so I thought that was interesting to kind of see in this. All right. Well, now we've seen Haman's been hung. He's dead. We still have a couple problems. The first problem is not so big. The king's out an advisor. He needs a new advisor. But the second problem is like the major part of the story still. the day of slaughter is still coming against the Jewish people. So my analogy, I don't know if this is helpful or not, but this is like a spy movie or something where you have a bomb maker who's made a bomb and the bomb is like ticking down. Well, they got rid of the bomb maker, but the bomb is still there, still ticking. They had to take out the bomb. They had to take out this, there's still this law. So what are they going to do? Well, first 2 verses of chapter 8, the first problem solved. Mordecai takes Haman's spot. You saw that coming a mile away. I mean, in this story where everything is being reversed, I mean, almost everything is being reversed. Of course, Haman's trying to kill Mordecai. Now Haman's dead. Mordecai's taken his spot as second in command. You couldn't, poetic justice, you couldn't form it any better than this if you tried. But we have second problem. The Jewish people still have many enemies in the kingdom. I don't know exactly. A lot of people think maybe there's some historical enemies that are against them, but they still have enemies in the city, and they still have to take care of that problem. They're not safe. The people are not safe. Maybe Mordecai is safe until this is, I guess, the 3rd month, so about 9 months in the future. But still, they have a problem to take care of. If you remember with Persian laws, what's unique in the Bible whenever it talks about the Persian laws? What can't be done with Persian laws? Can't be undone. So whenever the king writes a decree, it cannot be revoked. It has to stand. There are probably good reasons and bad reasons. The good reason is the rules can't change at a whim, hopefully. But the bad reason is it's basically saying the king is perfect. He's infallible in what he says. And also we know that advisors sometimes use this to their advantage, like in the story of Daniel, where King Darius is there and his advisors come and say, "Hey Darius, how about we have a day or a month where everyone comes and worships you?" And Darius is like, "Oh yeah, that sounds pretty nice." And they can only worship you, no one else. And of course, the plan is to get Daniel, who worships every day, twice a day, looking out his window, facing Jerusalem to God. And so they use that law to get Daniel thrown into the den of lions. So similar to that, we have another law here by the Persians where it cannot be revoked. So again, there's more tension rising in the story here. So what is the solution? Does anyone remember what the solution is? It's kind of interesting.
He gave the Jews the right to defend themselves against anybody that's coming for them, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So in verse 11 of chapter 8, it says, the king allowed the Jews who were in every city to gather and to defend their lives, to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate any armed forces of any people or province that might attack them, children and women included, and to plunder their goods. If you go back to Esther 3, verse 13, this is what Haman wrote against the Jews. Verse 13, chapter 3. Letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with instructions to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all Jews, young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, to plunder their goods. So it's an exact reversal. Let's take a step back from this and kind of, again, we're in this account, but sometimes we forget there are real people's lives on the line here. This is a real story. So this is kind of crazy. Haman has commanded like an ethnic cleansing of a group. And, contrary to a lot of modern nations that might kind of hide it and do it covertly, it's written on all the law signs, the billboards or whatever they had back then, saying, "Hey, on this day, take out any Jewish people that you want." It's out in the open. It's a state-sanctioned killing spree was the best way I could think of it, which is really brutal. One thing, I'm glad that we don't live in these times anymore. God would still protect, obviously, but this is a very brutal time. And so just keep that in mind as you read through the Jewish response, Mordecai's response. They're fighting for their lives here. And even in verse 13 of chapter 8 again, the goal is for the Jews were to be ready on that day to take vengeance on their enemies. So not only it is a defense, but it's also actually a little bit of offensive too, where they're going to take vengeance on their enemies. And it's kind of in a world where they're not really safe if they have enemies around. as we can see, there are people like Haman that are actually putting out decrees to kill all the people. Pastor Sen in his notes put it this way. Basically, the king signed an edict that would enact a civil war in his own dominions between the Jews and their enemies, so that both sides took up arms by his authority and yet against his authority. So this is just kind of wacky, to be honest. I don't really understand why this all happened, but the king, again, maybe not the best decision maker, has made it so that the two people groups will now fight each other on this day. That still doesn't mean that all the Jewish people will be safe. It just means that they're allowed to defend themselves. So what will happen? And before we get to that actual day, could someone read chapter 8, verses 15 and 17? This is what happens right after the decree is put out.
Verse 15 and 17.
Through 17.
So Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, and with a great crown of gold, and a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. And the Jews had light and gladness, joy and honor. And in every province and city, wherever the king's command and decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a holiday. Then many of the people of the land became Jews, because of the fear of Jews fell upon them.
Do you remember what happened after Haman put out his decree? Was everyone, trying to become not Jewish or anything? What happened after Haman had put out his decree was that the city of Susa was thrown into confusion. And here we have like the exact opposite. Instead of confusion, for the Jewish people, there's light, there's gladness, joy, honor. People are wanting to become Jews. Again, a complete reversal. And
They can't be doing them.
yes. And one of the, I don't know how many people truly converted to Judaism and truly followed God, but just again realize that if this story hadn't taken place, if God hadn't allowed all these events to happen, probably a lot of people in Persia would never have had the opportunity to learn about God, never had the opportunity to learn about Judaism. So there is actually even kind of a little bit of an evangelistic, perhaps, development that's happening in this story. But now we get to chapter 9, and I'll read verse 1 and then we'll just kind of talk about it. Now, in the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, on the 13th day of the same, when the king's command and edict were about to be carried out, on the very day when the enemies of the Jews hoped to gain the mastery over them, the reverse occurred. The Jews gained mastery over those who hated them. So the whole book, a complete reversal, and I'll just go through the numbers. In Susa, kind of the citadel itself, kind of the palace and that sort of area, 500 enemies were killed. Haman's sons were killed. If you read through the story, Mordecai was actually given ownership of Haman's belongings. So I wonder if there was a little bit of tension, even with Haman being kind of their new, he was the reason why their father died, and now he's the owner of all their property. So I imagine all his sons were very angry at Mordecai, but all his sons were killed, and they also were hung out on public display. Esther knew that there were more enemies. I don't know how she knew, but she knew there were more enemies within the kingdom itself, like within the palace area. So the Jewish people received permission to take out the rest of their enemies. And notice that even in this war, they were honorable in that they did not take the plunder. They only killed those who were their enemies. And in all the provinces total, verse 16 tells us that the Jewish people took out 75,000 of their enemies. That's a lot. Imagine being in a country and you have 75,000 people. Again, this is a big kingdom domain, but imagine having 75,000 people throughout the United States or something that are all trying to kill Christians or something. It's kind of unfathomable. This is what the Jewish people were dealing with. And again, it's thought that some of these could be the Amalekites, the historical enemies that Saul did not completely wipe out. That's from 1 Samuel 15. But something I wanted to point out too is that when the Jewish people did this, instead of just doing a complete demolishing and stealing everything and going on conquest, they proved their honor in that they didn't plunder, and they also proved that they weren't bloodthirsty or anything because they stopped after the days that were allowed them to do this. Then, what do all after a Jewish victory? What always happens in Old Testament after something good happens? After they cross the Red Sea, after other things. Yeah, they have a celebration. So they institute a feast, and I didn't look it up, but this is interesting in that it's Mordecai actually himself instituting the feast instead of like God specifically instituting the feast. I don't know if that's unique, but it's at least different than a lot of them. And the feast was called Purim, and it's still celebrated to this day. Does anyone know what Purim means, or Pur? Lots. So it means, lots. So it's the Jewish, basically they took the word and they added the plural ending. Purim means lots. So when you cast a lot, you're basically asking for some spiritual guidance through some other means. Obviously, God can sanction that. He had done that in the Old Testament, but also people who were superstitious and believed in other gods did that as well. And so it's kind of the whole point of this book, I really think, is what happened in the beginning because of these lots has been completely converted. And really the author is allowing you to make that decision. Who did it? But let's get to the conclusion before did that. Would someone read all of chapter 10? Don't worry, it's a short chapter.
King Ahasuerus imposed tax on the land and on the coastlands of the sea, and all the acts of his power and might, and the full account of the high honor of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him. Are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of the Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Ahasuerus, and he was great among the Jews, and popular with the multitude of his brothers, for he sought the welfare of his people and spoke peace to all his people. All right. So at first I was kind of wondering about this ending again. I was like scratching my head. Why is, okay, great, it's recorded somewhere else. King Ahasuerus imposed a tax. Good for him. Why this? And I really think the reason this is added here is to show this is a historical account. Again, like I said, the events in the story, this account, they're kind of crazy. This doesn't happen. This isn't, I don't think any of us have ever seen something quite this wild ever happen in our lives, where we've seen someone condemned to death and the person that condemned them has been put to death, and now they're taking their spot and their honor, and they're also a high-ranking government official. It doesn't normally happen. And even the Bible is like, yeah. And so, but this is a true story. And so the author leaves us with the question, who did this? And what's the answer? Obviously, it has to be God did this. Either that or it's complete, who knows, a fairy tale or something. But really, the author is forcing you to come to the conclusion. He's not letting you get away, he or she, I don't know. He's not letting you get away with saying, oh, interesting story, yeah, I got this stuff. You have to come to the conclusion yourself. Who did this? It's God that did this. But why did God make it happen like this? This is kind of just what goes through my head, so bear with me. But if the last Avengers Endgame, at one point, I think it's Falcon, he says, what if we just go and take out baby Thanos? Why didn't God just give Haman a sickness when he was an infant? Take him out then. Why did God make Mordecai and Haman be in the same city? Why did they have to cross paths? That's what seemed to start this whole problem. Why this whole plot? Why do you guys think that God, since we believe that God's directing the story, God's caused these events to happen, why did God make it happen this way? Why all this intrigue? Why with Haman? Why everything?
Gave a chance for Israel to turn back to God. God never forces things on people, and though He could have interceded and took out the threat, by the threat being there, Israel had to realize, oh, we're in trouble. What do we do? Who do we go to? And they turned to the one person that they know they could turn to, who's God. So I think that's why. Yeah, that.
I think that's the biggest reason. Israel was forced to turn to God. It's very easy when things are going well for a lot of us. For me, I know things are going really easy. It can be very easy just to kind of ride with it and say, oh yeah, God's helping me, He's blessed me, but not really realizing it. But then when you go through one of these difficult times, it becomes very clear. Once you prayed, when something happens that is beyond your control and you're saved from a certain scenario, God had to do that. That wasn't something I did. And I think that's exactly what God's doing here. So one of the reasons God shows this whole story is to show that, yes, God really does care about his people. Even if they're not following him exactly like they're supposed to, even if they're not back in Israel, even if they're spread out everywhere. And last verses I wanted to close on are actually for the Christian, and we're not Israel, but if you turn to Hebrews, and chapter 13. Hebrews 13, verses 5 and 6 say this. Keep your life free from the love of money and be content with what you have. For he has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. So we can confidently say, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me? And I don't know, that's awesome. So for all of us today, for me, for you, we serve the same God, even when things are beyond our control, when maybe we don't have a government this bad. Let's say, things aren't going with policies of the government aren't going the way we want. Perhaps we're in a tight scenario, trusting God. He will never leave you nor forsake you. That's all I have for this morning.
Pastor, just like.
Oh, okay.
I do want to say one thing, just talking about the kids, made me think, but I didn't think of it when I first was reading through it. But his actions even had an effect on his family. His kids died because of what he did. Showing that our actions don't just affect us; they affect all of us around us. From families to friends and things like that too. So I didn't think about that until you brought that up.
Did Pastor Sam talk about Haman's ancestry last week at all?
A little bit. He went into that a little bit. Yeah.
So that's another interesting thing. I think we're done with it.
Oh,
If you
yeah.
want to hear about it.
No, I wanted to that, but I can. I don't have.
Oh, I do.
That's why I dismiss this in prayer. Otherwise, I will. I guess I'll just go over. Dear Lord, thank you for this day again, Lord, and thank you for this time. This was a great time of being in your word. Thank you for Ethan taking the time to go into your word like that and to present this message, Lord. Thank you for guiding him through that and for this opportunity that we have here today. Do bless us as we go out and bless the service coming up here and the rest of our day. And just keep us safe, Lord. And Lord, I do pray that each and every one of us will always remember, that you are always with us, no matter what we're going through. That you never leave us nor forsake us. That is such incredible words that we must always remember, no matter how bleak the situation looks, and no matter how big those odds might be against us. You are greater than all things. Thank you, God, for all that you do. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen.